highlight of his background. He was active duty in the United States Army in the 82nd Airborne. He began his construction career in January of 1976, and he was involved with doing projects that included major chain hotels and retail shopping centers along the Washington, D.C. corridor. He was asked to manage the rehabilitation of 7 historic downtown buildings in Lower Town Harper's Ferry. Once he completed that, he was hired to oversee the restoration and structurally save the General McClellan Memorial Arch in Arlington National Cemetery by the United States Congress and Department of Interior. Eventually, he starts his own consulting company, the Davis Consulting Company. He was involved in planning and managing the restoration of historic buildings in the Gettysburg area. He stepped into full-time ownership and management of the Homefront General Store in Gettysburg. He was selected on the board of the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Association because of his knowledge of historical designs, not only in construction capability, but its management and so forth. Kirk eventually started reenacting in 1985 with the 23rd Virginia Infantry. A year later, he moved to the 139th Pennsylvania Infantry, and within 3 years he started the 3rd Maryland Infantry. After 2 years of that, the group grew until Kirk was able to organize the entire 12 Corps, which included the medical impressions, single corps, infantry, artillery, cavalry units. Kirk joined the Gettysburg Anniversary Committee, becoming the Chief of Staff for the Union Command, when the GAC President Randy Filial asked if he could form some kind of a living history program and or village in order to bring history to the public. Starting with 43 historians, the village grew, which now includes 2 speaker program tents, 8 staff personnel, and a living history village that has over 600 living historians sharing their expertise at various historical trades and subjects with the public. Tonight, though, he's not Kirk Davis. He is Dr. Samuel Mudd. So without further ado, I would like us, the Hershey Civil War Roundtable, to give Dr. Samuel Mudd a nice northern welcome and so forth. So.
Did anyone ever live below the Mason-Dixon border? Oh, that's good. So we do have a few friends here. I normally don't travel above the Mason-Dixon border. After all, some folks thought I was part of a large conspiracy to assassinate President Abraham Lincoln. And tonight I'm going to try to explain to you why I got caught up in that process. And you know, I can start off by first saying, yes, I was originally born in 1833. And my father was a wealthy planter in southern eastern Maryland, in Waldorf, Maryland. And I lived a very, very good life as a youngster. I got to go to Georgetown Prep, graduated from Georgetown Prep, and then I had an interest in medical. And so I went to the Baltimore Medical College. And after 2 years of very hard and difficult studies, I graduated and became a physician. And I went back to Waldorf, Maryland. And I had a lovely lady there named Frances, and we used to call her Frankie all the time. She was kind of a boyish kind of girl. She loved to ride horses and have fun, and we just did quite a few things in our young lives. So Frankie and I decided we were going to get married. So when I told my father, he said, well, I'm not sure that you're kind of a young man to be getting married at 24, 25 years old. And I felt that I had probably reached the point in my life where I needed a companion, if you know what I mean. And so he finally said okay, and so thus Frankie and I were married. And for our wedding gift, my father gave me about 200 acres off of his farm and 8 slaves. And so she and I were quite happy and pretty well set up for a future life. And as time went, a couple more years, we started having little people. And before you knew it, by about 1858, we had 4 children. And that was a pretty good deal. Our children loved the farm, and as they grew, we enjoyed each and every one of them. So for, I guess, the next couple of years, things went very well. I was a physician. I was, as physicians do in my day, every now and then I delivered a baby and got a hog instead of payment. Or I would take care of someone with the chicken pox and end up with half a dozen extra chickens at the farm. So I guess the couple hundred acres that my father gave us was kind of a handy place to kind of keep storing these things. Because after all, money was short in those times. Now in the 1850s, it was a tough time because we had a lot of abolitionists running around saying that they were going to free the slaves, but they didn't understand the economics of freeing a slave. And one of my friends, Andrew Johnson, not the vice president in the future of Andrew Johnson, but an Andrew Johnson doctor that I had met while I was at Baltimore School of Medicine. He lived in New York City. And he came down in the summers and thought he'd hang out with, us poor folks down here in Southern Maryland. And while he was there one week, he was explaining to me how difficult, he couldn't understand slavery at all. And he said, "Can you explain it to me?" And I said, "Well, Andy, what is there really to explain? These are people who have to work so that my farm can grow its crops and harvest the crops and make money, and we feed them, we take care of them, we house them. It's a way of life for several hundred years. I mean, after all, even when you go back all the way to the Declaration of Independence, it actually was going to eliminate slavery here in America, but it didn't, because a guy named Representative Rutledge from South Carolina was kind of wise enough to form a little group of South Carolinians, North Carolinians, and Georgia, because see, a few weeks before they were going to vote on the independence, and the Slavery Act was in there to review. He said, "Well, I would like to propose that we should vote unanimously on independence." Well, even our good friend in Massachusetts, John, he said, "I think that's an excellent idea." And so Ben Franklin agreed, and Thomas Jefferson agreed, John Hancock agreed. So, Andy, I don't understand what you mean. I mean, they all agreed that they should vote unanimously. But see, what Rutledge was really doing was he was setting up a voting law. Okay, politicians are pretty slick. And so Andy was like, "Yeah, I understand that. I mean, New York City and, politics is rampant up there. It's a way of life." And I said, "Well, when it came time to vote, the 3 states, or future states at that time, colonies said, no, we won't vote unless you remove the Slavery Act, because it is what we live by. It is our economic backbone of the South. It's not the North." And Andy goes, "Well, yeah, but it's slavery. Why would you want to have slaves?" And I said, "Well, let me finish the first story, Andy, and then I'll get into slavery." And he said, "Well, Okay, so the story ended, of course, as slavery did not get removed from the United States. It was removed from the independence document, and thus we then voted unanimously. So for 80 some more years, we had slavery, or the economics of slavery in America, below the Mason-Dixon. And as Andy, you're aware of, that the Mason-Dixon border is extremely important because the vote in Congress in the 1850s was anyone below the Mason-Dixon line, or any new states below the Mason-Dixon line, could vote slavery if they wished, or free states, and above would only be free states. And Andy said, well, look, you know, I know you like to talk a lot, but the deal is that, you know, slavery is wrong. And that kind of set me back, so I kind of reached out and poured another bourbon and offered him the same. And I said, Andy, you have slavery in the North. He said, no, we don't. He says, we don't have any slaves in the North. And I said, yes, you do. The Irish Catholics that you have enslaved, where you pay them pennies on the dollar to work. You don't even feed them. You send them home and they have to rent a home or live multi-families in a building. And I said, and then the next day, if they're not there, what do? You fire them or you beat them. I said, it's the same thing. I said, the only thing, the difference between your slavery and my slavery is that my black slaves have value. A man who works the field is worth $100 at a marketplace. A woman who works my house and has become somewhat educated with and takes care of my children, she's worth a bundle to me because I can trust her with my children's lives. These people actually become quite like family members because we do feed them. And I, at times, even work in the field. And he goes, well, I really don't see the correspondence between the two of these. I really don't. And I said, well, he said, if you had a beautiful stallion, okay, and it's worth $200, would you go out every day and beat that stallion with a stick? Well, no, why would I do that? Well, Andy, that's the same way we look at the people who work for us, that we would not beat them. Now, there are people who have been very harmful to those they have enslaved because they just hate themselves as well as anyone else. I said, but the issue on slavery is that no people should be enslaved. I know I'm a Southerner, but that's how I really believe. But I can't really change that until a time when the government and the people of America make that decision. I said, but I don't think, even with that decision being made, that you're going to free your slaves above the Mason-Dixon. You're going to keep paying them pennies on the dollar thinking you're doing a great job. You're really helping these folks out. So, and Andy was set back by that. He was a little upset that I thought that the Irish were the northern slaves. And, well, it upset him to a point, quite honestly, that he said, well, let's have another bourbon and say goodnight. And I think I'll be going back to New York City in the morning because I don't really relish the thought that you believe that I'm a slaveholder because I have Irish that work in my home. And so I'm afraid that our friendship is quite tense at this time, and I'm not going to, quite honestly, sit here and listen to a real slaveholder tell me I'm a slaveholder. So, needless to say, that was the last time I saw Andy. Never saw him again my whole entire life. But that's truly how I looked at that issue. That issue is a tense issue. You know, Thomas Jefferson put in there that all men were created equal. All men have a right to have freedom and have a pursuit for happiness. Those are pretty powerful words. And even though I'm a Southerner, I'm a slaveholder, I believe those words. And, well, that's kind of how I felt about slavery and the economics of slavery in the 1850s. About 1864, I met a man named John Wilkes Booth. He came to our little town and came out to my farm because I do have a couple of very nice stallions. And whenever I made enough money, I would always buy another good-looking horse. And people would say, my God, Doc, you seem to have the best-looking horses in the whole county. And I said, well, you know, you might be right. I think I might, because I enjoy those horses. And someday I think we go out and build a racetrack just to see how these things work. And of course, that never happened in Charles County. But getting back to my acquaintance with John Wilkes Booth, he came out to the farm and he looked around and he was telling me how he really loved this area. He was wondering if there was any land for sale. That when he retired as an actor, he may wish to become a gentleman farmer like myself. Well, yeah, an actor is an actor is an actor, as they say, and you never know whether they're telling you the truth or not, because by the end of the day, and having dinner with him, when he left, he never bought one of my horses. And I didn't hear from him again for a while. And one day, he came back by, and he said to me, he said, you're a dedicated Southerner, aren't you? And I said, well, I believe I am. He says, well, I have good people, and we want to capture or kidnap the President of the United States and hold him for ransom in an attempt to end this bloody war. And I said, well, I'm a physician. What am I going to do? I've only been to Washington City once or twice in my whole entire life. Most of it was just to go to school in Georgetown. And, I did what my father said, stay out of Washington City. So I did. He goes, no, he says, we don't want to harm him. We just want to hold him, and so we can get to a point where we could ransom him to the Congress. And even if we don't get any money, they'll just end the war and give us our Southern independence and allow us to keep slavery. Well, you've already heard my story and feelings on slavery. And so I explained that to Mr. Booth, and he said, well, I'm sure you understand that slavery is absolutely necessary for the existence of the South. And we got into a little bit of an argument, and I said, I don't think so. I think it's time for the South to start to modernize, to start trying to go from agricultural and pick up some manufacturing like the North has. The North has almost 50 to 1 in manufacturing compared to the South. And I truly believe manufacturing is the future for the South. Agriculture, is weather-driven all the time. One year we have a great crop of cotton, or here at my farm I have a great crop of tobacco. I'm a tobacco farm. But wouldn't it be so much easier to have the tax money coming from other things other than agriculture, and other men having jobs? And he said to me that basically I think he was dismissing me. He said, I really believe you're a dreamer. I guess you have been coddled by your parents for so long, and you're a physician, and you make good money, and apparently you're just a dreamer that, you know, all of a sudden the South is going to change. And I said, well, that's my, and I have to keep it. And since I am an American, I get to have that opinion. And by the way, I guess you're not going to buy any horses, are you? So I guess we're pretty much done. And so he said, no, we're not. What I want you to do as a physician is I'd like to use your farm as if we get our group together, we can capture one of the leaders, especially if we can capture Abraham Lincoln. We would like to come down through this way as we head south to Richmond. And in case we have a problem, you know, someone, you know, when you get into a tussle trying to grab somebody always seems to get hurt. And then we can stop here and we can take care of this, or perhaps Mr. Lincoln. And I said, well, I'm a physician. My occupation says one thing, that I have to take care of people, and I will take care of people. If you bring someone to me, I will take care of them. That's my Hippocratic oath, and I will not stray from that anymore. And I stray from my opinion on slavery. Mr. Booth, and he said, that's fine. He said, well, over the next month or so, I'll be sending some medical supplies to you. And when I get them down to you, just, you know, store them away and wait for us to get there. And I said, fine, that's fine. So, 64 went. Okay. Now it's January 65. And I've never received any medical supplies. So once again, I guess my actor who's an actor was just leaving me alone. Early February, believe it or not, there was a wagon full of medical supplies arrived. And I thought, well, I guess maybe kidnapping could be happening. And so I stored them in the old tobacco barn, and just went about my day because, you know, I just didn't know, quite honestly, whether anything was really going to happen. It seemed like the war was all but over, which meant slavery would be over, which me as a dreamer, my dream will come true. And so I thought nothing of it. And all of a sudden, here it is. I'm in bed with my lovely wife and my 4 children, and a rap on the door comes in the middle of the night. It has happened before, but not many times. So I get up and get down, and here it is, Mr. Harold and John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth is hobbling, and I see no one else. So I guess, wow, for myself, I'm kind of relieved, because that means we're not able to perhaps do the kidnapping. And so I offered them to come in. They did, and I put them in a room, and I looked at Mr. Booth's leg, cut off his boot because apparently it broke one of his leg bones. And I gave him some laudanum for pain. As you know, laudanum is whiskey and opium. If you drink enough of it, you feel pretty darn good. And so thus, what happened was that I set his leg, and I said, well, I've given you enough laudanum, but the pain has pretty much subsided, and I will let you go and rest here on this bed. And your friend here can do whatever he wants, but I'm going back to bed. So I went back up to my lovely Frankie and fell right to sleep. The next morning we got up around 7 o'clock like we normally do, and I go to the room and there's no one there. Booth and his friend had taken off. And in a way, I was greatly relieved. I thought, great, you know, he didn't have Abe Lincoln with him, and he most certainly didn't have anyone else. So, and they were gone, so my family now is safe again. And hopefully, whatever is over. Well, that day I was going into Waldorf, and I got in the buggy and took off. And as I got to town, I noticed there's a lot more Union cavalry running around, and everybody had this worried look on their face, and it was so tense. So finally, I stopped one of my friends and I said, "What's all the Union doing in town?" He said, "Didn't you hear?" And I said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Lincoln last night. You could knock me over with a feather." I thought, oh my gosh. He didn't even try to kidnap him. He killed him in cold blood and then came to my house. And I was beside myself. One, the killing of the president was never a consideration. And two, killing the president, the war had ended. It was over. You know, there was no need for Vince's killing. And so I got in my buggy. And I went back to the house. And I told Frankie, I said, "Whatever you do, don't tell anybody that John Wilkes Booth was here last night." And she said, "Well, honey, I didn't even know. I didn't get up. You know, I stayed in bed." So I said, "Well, whoever comes here and ask any questions, you just tell them that we were here and nothing happened, and it was a quiet evening." So a day or two went by, and a couple Army officers came to my house, knocked on the front door, and I left my office, walked to the front door, and opened the door, and there we were. They said, "Dr. Mudd." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Do you need my help in any way?" I said, "Well, we just want to ask a couple questions." I said, "Okay." He said, "Did you have any visitors in the late evening for the last couple of nights?" And I said, "No, not at all." He said, "Do you know John Wilkes Booth?" I said, "No, I don't know who he is." And he said, "Good, okay. Well, he apparently assassinated our president, and we're looking for him. And he headed this way. And we figured if he was injured, he might come to a local doctor. So we appreciate it. Just keep a lookout. He's dangerous. If you see him, do us all a favor, shoot him." And I said, "Well, I save lives. I don't shoot lives, kill people. So I'll let you know if he comes by." Well, about 3 days later, those same officers came back, and this time with about 8 or 10 troopers from the 12th New York, and they said, "Dr. Mudd, we want to see you inside your home. We've heard that John Wilkes Booth came to your house in the evening and the morning after to have his leg repaired." And I said, "Well, where did you get this information at?" He said, "Well, are you going to let us in?" And I said, "Well, my children are in here. My wife is in here. Why would, you know?" He said, "Well, we have the right to come in." And I said, "Well, I guess you do." So they did. And they went in and they went through the rooms. And lo and behold, about 15 minutes into the search, room by room, they found a boot. The same darn boot that I cut off of his leg, saying J.W. Booth. They said, "Dr. Mudd, you lied to us. You said you didn't even know this man. And here his boot, he's in your house." And I said, "I didn't even know it was there." And I said, "Yes, I did lie." too, because we have to take you in. And so they took me into Waldorf, locked me up in the jail. Then they moved me within a few days up to Washington City, and the trials began. And of course, there were the Harold. They had found him. Apparently had shot and killed John Wilkes Booth, which was, in a way, being a good Christian father, I still felt somewhat relieved that they did shoot the son of a gun, because I don't know what's going to happen to me now. My 4 children and my lovely wife may never see me again. And as the trial went on, the others were found guilty, and I was found guilty. But there was one colonel that understood what I had done. And he fought and he held out his vote that kept me from the gallows. But it did give me life in prison at the dry tortugas at Fort Jefferson, down out in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, has anybody ever been to the Gulf of Mexico dry lagoons? Well, you know what Fort Jefferson looks like. I was incarcerated there for over 3 years. It was a horrible time. The only bright time was when I would receive letters from Frankie telling me about the kids growing and she's doing okay. And my father is taking care of them. And of course, now that slavery is gone, we had no workers, so all my fields went away. They were feral. They weren't worth a darn thing. They had weeds everywhere. So I thought to myself, well, I guess even if I get a chance to go back, I will be broke for the rest of my life, even if anybody would trust me to be their doctor. Let alone try to be a tobacco farmer again. But while I was there, my particular cell was on the outside wall, and it was about, 8 foot high, about 8 foot wide, and about 10, 12 feet long. But I was on the windward, rainy side of the fort. So whenever a storm came, I ended up with about a foot of water every time. And so thus, laying in a bed about 16 inches off the floor, you were hoping that the water was not going to come up to the bed height. So my entire time there, I did not ever get that, but what they did was the black guards, okay, all our guards were black, except for the officers were white, and they knew I was not a bad person, and one of the guards had given me a bucket so I could bail out my cell. And so that's exactly what I did. So whenever it rained, I was always good for 15, 16, 18 buckets of water out through the window, just about as fast as it came in. One of the things that I was given after a year was the right to work in the carpenter shop. Well, I was making some things in the carpenter shop that I think as a doctor, I thought I was like a junior engineer, and I was putting together some wood products that looked like they could float well, looked like they kind of went together if you could put them all together at one time. And so they caught me making these pieces, and they said, "Dr. Mudd, you're attempting to escape." I said, "I'm not attempting to escape. I'm in the middle of Fort Jefferson. Yeah, I'm in a carpenter shop. All I'm doing is cutting lumber." And they said, "Yes, but we noticed that some of these pieces that seem to very intricate matter will fit together. And that may be something you're trying to build, like a little life raft, to think that you're going to get yourself from here in the dry lagoons at Fort Jefferson back to Florida and get away." I don't know if you've ever been up the top of the wall, which I do know you're not, you have never. But if you look out there, we have some pretty big fish out there. And those fish are sharks. That's why they also call this Shark Island. Because everybody who's ever gotten in that water and tried to think that they were going to go 90 miles east to Florida found out that they were just another meal for one of those big fish. So we don't really have to worry about taking away your privileges from places like the building the little things here in the wood shop, because we know you're never going to make it anyway. But we want you to know that we know what you're doing. And so that little issue kind of slid by for a month or so. About that time, yellow fever had struck the island. And yellow fever, to that point, was a death sentence. There was no way that if you got contracted yellow fever, that you were probably going to survive. Honestly, we didn't even know how people contracted the yellow fever. But within a month or so, the warden, assistant warden, many of the guards, many of the prisoners had gotten sick with the yellow fever. And then what happened was the only doctor on the island other than myself, which I, of course, was not considered a doctor, I was a prisoner, got sick with the yellow fever. And what happened was they came to me and they asked me if I would come as a prisoner, but as a doctor first, to the first aid area and to the hospital and try to help these men. And I, of course, my Hippocratic oath said, yes, I would. And so I said, yes, I would. And so I went over, and within weeks, we were losing patients right and left. It was quite terrible. And you get a horrible fever, and you just completely get dehydrated, and you get to a point where you can't eat. And so, as you know, 3 or 4 days without eating, you don't live. And 5 or 6 days without water, you don't live. So yellow fever was taking them very quickly. One of the things I noticed, I was trying to look around and try to consider, as I was looking through the hospital, all these windows were shut, okay? And, you know, the wind outside was just howling, but the windows were all shut. And I thought, well, I guess it keeps the men from getting chilled or whatever. But inside this hospital was lots of mosquitoes. They were just all over the place. It just was unbelievable. And so finally, with the help of one of the other prisoners who didn't get sick, he said, Dr. Mudd, we gotta get these bugs out of here. My gosh, they're eating us alive. They're biting us all the time. And so we opened up the windows and the wind blew, and it blew, you know, the shabby curtains they had on the windows, and they blew the bugs out. And all of a sudden now the bugs weren't inside. There were less bugs. And one of the other things we noticed was during some of our breaks as we walked around the courtyard, all the little rain puddles had these little moving animals inside of it. You could just actually look down and see them just like swimming, or as you would say. And I said, what are they? And then we kept looking over a series of days, and the little ones stopped swimming in the water, and all of a sudden they were gone. The new little ones were in the water. And here they were. We surmised that they must be the larvae to these mosquitoes. And so thus, I ordered everyone to run around and going to drain all these little ponds all over the fort because they were everywhere. And another thing we did was we kept those windows open, and we kept the wind blowing through there. And as that wind blew, we noticed they couldn't come in, okay? They couldn't fly against the wind. And so thus, we were keeping them out. What was also amazing was we cooled that room down enough that the men, as long as we kept them wiped down with water, clean water, okay, which we were able to capture from the different storms, we would keep them wetted down, and they would cool down, and their fevers were starting to break down, and all of a sudden they were starting to get well. And after a while, we turned the corner on this disease, and so that was the first time we had figured out, okay, here, all the way out here in the dry Tortugas, how to attempt to save people from the yellow fever. Now, I also did some experiments, okay, the men who did get well, okay, we transferred some of the blood to the guys that were sick, okay. Well, we really didn't in those days understand what we were doing, but we thought we were giving good blood against sick people, and the good blood would win out. For hundreds of years, including our dear friend George Washington, if they got ill, they would bleed you, okay, or they cup you, okay, and draw blood. And so I was thinking, instead of drawing blood and cutting and letting them bleed, so the bad blood would get out, I would try to put good blood in. And then basically that was the beginning of the cure for the yellow fever, which good antibodies went into the sick man. Well, we got through that crisis, and I went back to the carpenter shop. And no, I wasn't building a daggone raft, but so I was going along by my own, and it's now the wonderful year of 1868, and the warden got better, his assistant warden got better, the doctor got better, and I did not know, but the warden and some of the guards sent letters to then Vice President, now President, Andrew Johnson, the other Andrew Johnson, not my friend from medical school, and to say that I should be released because I did a very unselfish thing, is put myself in harm's way and really had maybe found a cure for yellow fever, which was something that they across the entire country and probably the world was happy for. Well, it was as they say, a letter campaign, because it took more than one letter, I guess. And in 1869, in February, I received back a letter that was an official letter from the United States of America Presidential Office. And the warden called me in and read it to me. And it said that if I could prove that I was going to be a good, loyal citizen of the United States of America now, all 36 states, that I could be released and get to go back home to my family, my 4 children, and my lovely Frankie. And of course, what do you think I said? Sure, no problem, I'm a great citizen. Never wanted to be here in the first place. But we sent a reply back, and then on March the 8th, my release was actually official. And it took me about a month and a half to get home to Waterloo, Maryland, and see my beautiful wife and my 4 children. Well, I can tell you, it was a struggle. Some people held it against me, because I was a part of that conspiracy. But I really, truly was not part of a conspiracy to assassinate what I thought was a good man, and certainly not part of a conspiracy once a war had been won. But it took me many years to gain the trust of more people. Eventually, without slaves, working in the field myself as a physician, plowing that sandy soil and planting my tobacco, having my one son, who is now 7 years old, help me out by dropping the tobacco plants in place. We eventually got to the point where we were now planting about a fourth, maybe a third of our original acreage. And we now can scratch out a small living. One thing I also did was during this time, some of the slaves that had been with me had come back. And they said, you know, Dr. Mudd, it's awful hard out there. You know, if you let us go back into our old houses, and we'll help you work the farm if you'll pay us some money. And I said, men, ladies, your children, I have no money. I mean, I just got out of prison.
Okay.
I don't know what we can do. And they said, well, let us help you. And by the end of the season, when we sell the tobacco, just give us some money so we can continue to live. And we'll continue to work. And we'll go about it in that manner. That's the only thing we can do. We're all in the same boat now. You know, black man or white man, we're just trying to survive. And so I said, sure, let's do this. Let's try it. The worst thing we can do is starve to death at the end of the year, but we'll try. And so we did. Little did we know that what we were calling it, we didn't call it anything other than survival, but what it really was sharecropping. And it did catch on throughout the South. And because you gotta remember, all those big plantations, 200 acres sounds like a lot of acres, doesn't it? Well, it is when you don't have any, but when you have 200 versus 2,000 is a big difference. And so that apparently, what we attempted in Little Waldorf, Charlestown, Maryland, was something new, and it did work out. And those families stayed with me for quite some time, and we did share our crop money, and they did survive, and they began to flourish because we were able to do more acreage. Well, you know, being away from Frankie for 4 years almost that's a long time to be away from a woman you've been in love with since you've been about 12 years old. And over the next 6 or 7 years, my medical practice got better, got larger. The farm started to succeed, and we had 4 children when I left. Within 6 years, we had 5 more. So we must have missed each other a little bit. Now we have 9 children. So now, the 200 acres sound like a lot, doesn't sound like enough. And so we had 9 children. We tried our best to survive. I did write President Grant when he became, in 1872, when he became president. I asked him if I could possibly be considered to be pardoned, because I was never a part of an assassination. I was never a part of anything like what John Wilkes Booth and his henchmen did. And well, to my dying day, I've never been pardoned. People think that I've been pardoned. I was released on good behavior, but not pardoned from my crime of being associated with John Book's booth. So, that's the truth. And that's the story that really happened. So when you read something in the newspaper, remember, half of what you read in the newspaper isn't right, and a third of what you see isn't right. So please understand that I was caught up in a situation that, as a doctor, I did my job. As a citizen of the United States, or in those times, a citizen of the southern state, even though Maryland didn't succeed, I should have not received those medical supplies. I should not have lied. I should have said, yeah, I know that dirty rascal, and by God, I hope you catch him. They probably would have never came back. But I received those supplies. I lied twice. I was caught in my lie, and I served 4 years of very, very hard time in Fort Jefferson. And now I live at home. I have 9 children. My dear Frankie is the dream of my life now. And that's the end of my story. So thank you all very much. All right, well, questions? I don't know any answers.
Okay. Dr. Mudd,
Yes, sir.
did you ever write up your findings, what observations about the yellow fever in prison, and was there a way of having it published in a medical journal? See as how, about 40 years later, somebody else is going to get all the credit
Right.
for discovering the cure for yellow fever.
Well, the easiest way to answer that is very simple, sir, is the victors write history, okay? And he was a victor in my book because he got to write it up and tell everybody about it. I'm sure he used many of the findings that we had written down in the prison hospital because it was in all the newspapers, for goodness sakes.
Okay, there was a publication.
Right, so it got out, but,
Okay.
you know, were you gonna listen to another physician, or you're gonna listen to a guy in prison that just happened to get lucky and through observation came up with a semi-cure / survival of yellow fever. Anything else? Yes, sir.
When were you pardoned?
Never.
Weren't you pardoned after your death?
Nope, never. It was even on President Johnson's desk in 1968, and it was in Mr. Nixon's in 73, and it was on Mr. Trump's at this time. He's never been pardoned because his one son, who was a doctor, well, it's his, not son, excuse me, it's his third-time great-grandson, who was a doctor, a physician, has been the one who sent it to President Trump. And he's never been pardoned because I just told you I was guilty. So, no, so a lot of people, and even if you look up in Wikipedia, okay, because I go through all this when I do these different folks that I do. And Wikipedia says he was pardoned in 68. Well, he was still in prison in 68, for goodness sakes. But, you know, it has it that he was pardoned. He was released on good conduct. That's all. Yes, ma'am.
Questions. One did Dr. Mudd and Frankie, how long did they live?
1883, he passed away at 49 years old. And the reason for it was probably the yellow fever, because he did contract some of it, but he gave himself the first injection from the healthy man, because he did not want to possibly commit suicide to someone or kill someone And so he apparently carried that yellow fever with him for quite some time. You have to understand too, out in the dry lagoons, you know, 90 miles off of the coast of Florida, that's the only piece of land out there for a long time until you get to Mexico. So the problem you have is that whatever gets out there, it normally stays there, sets into mosquitoes, and mosquitoes also, they found out later, about 25 years later, the mosquitoes carry malaria. Okay, so so if you see a big mosquito, leave it alive, don't kill it. It's not gonna bite you. The big is the killer mosquito. The little ones are the females who lay the larva, and that will pass on and eat the blood out of your arm. The large ones are called killer mosquitoes. They actually kill the smaller ones. Kind of like, you know, the black widow spalier, you know, it lays the eggs and kills them, or the praying mantis. The female kills the male. But no, so that was the first question. What was the
Yeah,
second?
Frankie, how long did she live?
Same year she died also.
Wow.
Within months of each other. Yes.
Blood typing. That was my second question. They didn't know about blood typing at the time. So it was hit or miss, but more people survived than didn't from
Correct.
transfusion.
Right. You gotta remember, most white folks were European descent. Okay, I do my DNA, 52% Scottish, Irish, okay, 30% Viking, which created the Scottish and Irish, okay, and then the other 20% was German, because they go across the channel. So mine was very similar to most others in that white community, and so thus your blood typing. So if I gave blood to someone, they would probably survive with mine. Okay, so nowadays it's broke down quite a bit. Yes, sir.
Did Frankie and Zola Mills have any connection with this? Did they meet each other? Did you meet the wives? Were the wives involved in this meeting that you and John Cruz had?
No, women were never. You have to remember, in Europe, women didn't have a right to sit down at a table of business, okay, until about 1960s or 70s. 1960s or 70s, not 18s. Okay, up until 1910, when you got the vote, it was the first time women became real citizens. Remember, black men got the right to vote in 1865. Not until 1910 did women. Okay, then you were considered a person. You have to remember also, Irish Catholics never were allowed to buy land in America that they may have fought and died for until 1791, when Congress passed a law that allowed them to buy land. I have bought land that said on the deed, this land cannot be transferred to Irish Catholics, blacks, or Jews. Okay? And I had a friend who was Jewish, and he loved buying that kind of property up. Just way away.
So your wife never,
He called me up and said, hey, we got another piece of property.
so your wife never knew about the meeting?
No.
Before you showed up at the doorstep?
No, not at all. Women were not a part of that stuff. The only woman who was involved with it was Mary Surratt, who was hung, but she wasn't really a part of it probably either, because her sons and all. Do you know that in 1867, her son came back to Washington City, tried to turn himself in, and you know what they told him? Get back on your horse and get out of here. We're done with that thing. It's over. Can you believe it? And so then you look at Mary Surratt, that probably was cooking and making coffee, hung. Her son gets away scot-free. Dr. Mudd goes to 4 years of hard time in Dry Lagoon. So, you know, it was a political time. Yes, sir.
There were 9 children. There must be a lot of living relatives today related to Dr. Mudd.
Oh, there
Have you
is.
met some of them?
Yes, I go to the Dr. Mudd house at different times for special things. And we did a play there, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. That was similar to what my talk was tonight, okay? And, but they come back quite a bit, actually. There are, and they, like his 4-time great-grandsons, write letters to the president, hoping that someday he'll be pardoned, but I don't think it'll ever happen. You know, if Jimmy Carter didn't pardon him, nobody will. I'm sorry, that was a political statement. I was trying to get on my soapbox, but I couldn't get up.
Was it true that Fred Spangler came back and lived with Dr. Mudd
Yes.
after Fort Jefferson?
Yeah.
Did they know each other before?
No, not really. You gotta remember, these are small towns and, you know, but not officially. No, they weren't like riding partners or, you know, for Sunday afternoon. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
First time the officers came to visit you, you think if you would have just said right up front, I knew of him, and he was here, you think it would have made a difference?
I think so, because you gotta remember, there was one man in Washington City who wanted revenge for the murder of President
Stanton.
Lincoln. And that was Mr. Stanton, Secretary of War. He wanted somebody to pay for that act of treason. And if he would have said, yeah, I've heard about him, why, what's up? And, you know, they probably would have dismissed it and went on. Or maybe they asked 3 or 4 more questions, but as long as it was vague, it probably would have solved.
Well, even
that
just,
need.
even just setting his leg, if you would have went back in and got the boot and said, yeah, he was here, I mean, but that's my job as a physician, you still,
Well, he didn't know that boot was there.
yeah.
Believe me, you probably could have knocked him over with a feather when they found that boot and showed it to him. But,
Well, didn't they find it under the bed?
yes, he
That's where
found
it was under the bed,
he
yeah.
was sleeping on,
Mhm.
which was easily bumped and
Bumped,
kicked by anybody. Heck, it could have been one of the kids
Yeah.
kicked it under the bed. Yes, ma'am?
Years ago, our round table went on the John Wilkes Booth escape route,
Oh, yeah.
so I was at your property.
Oh, good. Well, we're glad to have you. No, it is a great property, and one of the past presidents, he was a University of Maryland basketball coach, or was. I guess he's retired now. His name was Eddie Roberts, and he was the president probably about that time. And he's now on our Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Group board, and we're really glad to have him because he's really progressed the Dr. Mudd home and got it put back together and made it look good, and got the tours going and the little storefront there, the little gift shop that's in there. But it's a tough thing. History, we're all the age of history learners. We continue to learn because we love history. You know, unfortunately, our children have not, and hopefully grandchildren have begun to pick it up. I've noticed that my grandkids have started to come out and do things, but of course they're only 8 or 10 years old. And you know, one thing they've said many times, many ways, if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. And that can't be any truer than looking at today's problems that we have today. So, anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
One more.
Oh, I had to-
Yeah, because I can talk all
The
night.
quick one is that your name is Mudd. Is that really from the Sandy
No,
Mudd? I
that
thought it
actually
was
came
famous.
out before Dr. Mudd became
Okay.
famous, about 1850. It was in a play in New York City.
Okay, so.
Okay,
that's what I heard.
your name's Mudd to me. So that came out of the play.
Okay, so second and more the question is, there is a theory that John Wilkes Booth was not in that barn and was not the person who was killed. The conspiracy theory, have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah,
Satan.
matter of fact, I was in that movie that they made with, what was that guy's name? What was that guy's name, Diane? It was a famous actor, young actor, but yeah,
Was it in, oh, that Stanton was hell-bent on getting someone to blame for it, and when they had caught him as a prisoner, this is what as one of the theories, a prisoner was being brought up from the south, and they staged it.
well, you know,
The family years later will not let his body be disinterred, and that was part of the.
yeah, well, since I wasn't there originally, almost anything can happen. One of the things I did in the military was military intelligence and counterintelligence. So, I can tell you, there's some stories that aren't stories, and some things that you don't think happened did happen, so. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. All I know is whatever happened to John Wilkes Booth then. Was he like Jesse James, and he show up 50 years later?
No, one is that he went overseas, and the other theory is that he went to the Midwest.
Yeah, well, think about it. I mean, today we have a cell phone. I mean, anybody can take a picture of anybody and videotape somebody. 1950s, you couldn't do that. You didn't get away with a lot of things, okay? 1900s, you get away with a whole lot of things. You wouldn't even telephone then, hardly, in many places. Telegraph didn't come into 1850s. So, the further you go back, the more you can disappear. You know, states were really independent countries back many years before the Civil War. That's why Robert E. Lee said he could not fight and become the general of the Union Army, even though he was asked, because he couldn't fight against his own state of Virginia. And of course, that must have been something when you sat in the White House to look across the Potomac and see his plantation. You know, and Arlington was his home plantation. And it only became the cemetery because a man named Colonel Meigs' son was killed by the Confederates. And he said that he would destroy his plantation by putting bodies right up to the front door. And by God, if you go there, they did. And I spent about 6 months there working on General McClellan's Arch Memorial Gate that almost fell down. So, yeah,
You would think that they could go back to their records at that time, because if Stanton was involved in that conspiracy, it's documented. I mean, you were in intelligence, so they don't document it.
you know, I want to tell you something I want you to know and only you to know. I walk out into the middle of the field and I tell you and I walk away, no one else said it. No one heard it, no one seen it, no one knows what we said. Now it's plausible deniability, you against me. Depending on how much power you have, that's how much plausible deniability you have. Okay, so just read your Facebook stuff, this crap that's out there. You can figure it out from there. Hey, are you? Oh, he's just looking.
All right, well, first of all, there's
Oh,
a certificate.
man.
Now, you can give this to one of your grandkids.
Hey, you know what? I was gonna ask you for one of these. I love hats.
Well, and then,
Or what?
do you want this or does she want this?
Oh, that'll
Do you
be-
want this?
That'll make her happy.
There,
Come on up here and get your chocolate. I might get home.
you're not allowed to share it with
Okay, well, thank you.
I would like us to give him a nice thank you.
Thank you very much, and this money will go back to the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservations Group called Patrick's Hope. which is for the underprivileged kids in Gettysburg.
Oh,
who
great.
Don't really get food. Okay, we have to get them food every day.